Good morning, everyone. I'm John Hudak, the Director of the Office of Cannabis Policy, and your moderator for today's event. On behalf of the Office of Cannabis Policy, we thank you for being here for the latest installment of OCP's Cannabis Conversations panel series. We're excited to be jumping back in today with a cannabis conversation on sample collection. As many of you know, this fall, the office issued its first few recalls of adult-use cannabis and cannabis products in the program's 4-year history. We've learned a lot through our investigations into these incidents, and today we'll go into detail about some of those lessons learned. This fall, the office also increased efforts to perform random audit testing of products that recently passed initial testing for contaminants. A couple of those audit tests led to recalls, highlighting that gaps do exist for some licensees with regard to sampling, handling, and the use of remediation technology. We will provide guidance related to those processes throughout our event today. Before we jump into our moderated discussion, I'd like to introduce our panelists. First, Vern Malloch is the Deputy Director of Operations at OCP. In this capacity, Vern oversees the licensing and compliance teams within the office and plays an integral role in oversight of all program participants. Prior to joining OCP, Vern was employed by the City of Portland as a police officer for 35 years. The last 6 years, he served as the Assistant Police Chief, and during his last year of service to the city, Vern was the Acting Police Chief. Next, Diana McKenzie is OCP's Chemist. In this capacity, she serves as a technical consultant for cannabis testing and works to compile and manage OCP's testing database. Prior to joining OCP, Diana worked for the Maine CDC for 3 years as the Cannabis Testing Facility Certification Officer. She previously held roles at the Maine Health and Environmental Testing Laboratory, the Maine Milk Quality Laboratory, and Maine DEP. We're going to start off with a moderated discussion, and we'll save the last 10 to 15 minutes to address questions from the audience. Please feel free to use the Q&A function to submit questions throughout the event, and we'll come back to them at the end. Vern, I'm going to start with you. Can you provide some background on how the recent recalls came about? What were some of the issues identified along the way?
Sure, thank you, John. So I think it's important to frame this so that we understand that compliance at OCP works in several ways to monitor testing. And one of the things that we do is we review test results and we try to flag results that are suspicious or inconsistent or just unexpected. And that can look like several different things. So one of the things it could be is we could see that that no remediation is mentioned, and a product failed for say 300,000 units for yeast and mold, and then 2 days later it's retested and it passes. And that, that would be suspicious to us. It's unexpected. It's not explained. So it could be something as simple as that causes a flag for us. So we act on those and we begin investigations. We also recently began introducing random audits of testing, and what the random audits look like is a review of the sampling practices that are used at each facility, and we're doing this as part of our regular inspections. So there's no indication of anything being inconsistent or suspicious, but it's just part of good business to regulate and track this. It's an important thing. So we look at video and we look at interviews of staff who conduct this sort of sampling. And part of that we've expanded to include sampling ourselves, where we go in and we create and take a representative sample and submit that to the same lab and compare the results that we receive with the results that the licensee received. And both of those things have led to these recent recalls. In some instances, it was material that was flagged as inconsistent and suspicious. And in other instances, it was the result of audit testing that identified an issue that was investigated and deemed to be a public health and safety issue. I think that there are really 5 things that we've identified along the way through these recent recalls that I'd like to highlight. One of them I mentioned briefly, and that's a failure to list the remediation methods. There is a requirement that in metric, when a product has failed testing and it's remediated, there's a remediation list that you have to pick from to tell us what you did to change this product in an effort to get it to pass the mandatory testing. And in many cases, that step is being missed. There's also been an issue with failing to take a representative sample. And this is critical to getting accurate test results. Because what we find is that when people take a representative sample, a sample that's been homogenized and really reflects the entire batch, they're more likely to pass than fail when they do that. But there are also instances where not taking the representative sample allows it to pass when it shouldn't. So that's an issue. We've also identified something that's more concerning to us, equally as concerning, I guess, is treating the sample after it's been collected. So where a licensee will take a representative sample, but then they treat that sample before sending it to the lab for testing. And this may happen in an effort to increase efficiency at their level, where they're going to treat the product later, but they want to get it off to testing sooner. Can be a number of things, but that's a big issue and something that's not acceptable. And it means that you've no longer taken a representative sample. The other issue has to do with administrative holds not being communicated to all the staff and stores. When we issue an administrative hold, it's important that that product be quarantined and it be clear to all employees that it cannot be sold. We know that this has happened and did result in some recalls. And we want to make sure that staff is being communicated clearly on that. And the fifth thing is that we are identifying a problem with video not being preserved. It's really difficult for us to investigate if we don't have the video to look back on. Excuse me. So those are the significant issues that we've identified as part of these recalls. John?
And Vern, I'm just going to pick up quickly on one of the last points you made to add to it. In terms of notifying businesses, licensees, when an administrative hold has been put on, it's important to make sure that licensees are ensuring that their contact information at OCP is up to date, so we can communicate with them as quickly as possible and as accurately as possible, and recognizing that there is turnover in this industry, so that if you have an individual listed with our licensing division as the point of contact, and that person moves on or is terminated, it's important to make sure that that's up to date so we can communicate as quickly and accurately as possible. Diana, I'd like to turn to you next. We know that one recall was as a result of testing irregularities discovered through our office's regular review of mandatory test results. Can you talk more about your role in monitoring mandatory test results and what kinds of things might jump out to you as a data irregularity?
Yeah, sure. As the overall structure of the system, each week the testing facilities all submit the testing data that they have issued for the previous week to the OCP. And then I will take that data and I upload it into our database. During that process, I will scan the data for anything that looks like either an error from the testing facility, such as analysis dates that don't make sense, missing sample data. I also look for missing testing categories for each sample. For instance, if an extract has been tested, does it include testing data for residual solvents, metals, and pesticides? If it is missing one or all of those tests, I will go ahead and make sure the batch wasn't previously tested for that category. And if it is truly missing any of those tests, I will then send notification over to our compliance team so that they can contact the licensee to perhaps get a second sample resubmitted for the missing test for that batch. Other types of data irregularities might include samples that had failed for an analyte previously at high levels, such as perhaps one of the heavy metals, but when the retests are submitted, they pass at non-detect. So depending on the analyte category, retest coming back clean can be possible, such as a residual solvent. It is entirely possible to remediate out solvent from an extract that had failed initially, or it can be very unlikely, such as with the heavy metals or pesticides. Those two categories of contaminants are not allowed to be remediated. So when the retests come back at non-detect, it just doesn't seem a situation that is likely. So those get flagged for further investigation by the compliance team to find out how that might have happened. And one final example of a data irregularity would be when an edible fails for like a high THC per serving. That would be about 11.5 milligrams per serving, or for THC per package, that would be above 215 milligrams per package. And if there's no remediation entered in metric, but the retest samples are submitted soon after the fail is reported, and it passes, both of the retest passes, that again is another flag for further investigation. Was there remediation done? What was it? Why wasn't it entered in metric? Just to get the whole, process ironed out, to make sure that we understand what happened, to make sure that everything is done the way it should be. So those are really the three types of the most common kinds of irregularities that I find in data.
Vern, can I follow up with you on this? As Diana noted, when she identifies irregularities in the data, she notifies the compliance team that those irregularities have popped up. Can you talk a little bit about where things go from there once Diana makes that notification to compliance, and a little bit about how this data analysis and compliance role has prevented recalls in the past?
Yeah, sure, John. That's a great question. Our effort with the information that Diana just talked about, our primary effort here is to try to get to product that maybe hasn't been properly tested or handled, and prevent that from being transferred to retail, and prevent it from being sold, so that we don't have to do recalls. And we have been very successful in that result. More often than not, when we identify an issue, sometimes it's as simple as a phone call to a licensee to say that, hey, we noticed that this batch hasn't been tested for pesticides yet. Are you aware of that? Because it looks like every other panel has been done. And they will often say, gosh, we missed that. Thank you for letting us know. And they will immediately turn around and submit it for pesticide testing. So sometimes it's as simple as a phone call. Other times we have to have a visit where we arrive and we say, listen, we want to review your sampling method. We want to look at the video, and we want to talk to the person that sampled it and find out why the results are what they are, maybe. And we'll decide whether we're going to need to do an investigatory sampling ourselves and submit that, and place the product on an administrative hold while we investigate. So it can really run the gamut, but the big piece of that is we try to move as swiftly as possible. Usually within a day of Diana flagging that for us, we will be making our first phone calls to licensees to get the balls rolling on trying to investigate those. Again, with the effort being to prevent the need for a recall.
So to move on and to follow up on the recalls that came about as a result of audit testing, could you talk about the process of audit testing generally and why it's important?
Sure. So you've heard me reference audit testing, and you've heard me reference investigatory testing, and those are two different things. Investigatory testing is when we are investigating a complaint either from within the office, like what Diana's been mentioning about suspicious or inconsistent results. Or it could be a complaint that we're investigating from the public. Maybe it's an adverse reaction complaint. Those are a little bit different than an audit testing situation. Audit testing is a randomized audit of product and of the testing process itself. Why it's important that we do audit testing is because we are allowing self-sampling, right? So licensees are allowed by rule to sample themselves, which is different. There are other jurisdictions, other states that don't allow that. Maine is a state that does allow that. We want to have flexibility for licensees to be able to do this work and to make sure that it happens in a timely way that's convenient for them and allows them to operate with whatever speed and efficiency they want to. But there is also an expectation that they're going to follow some pretty strict rules around sampling. And audits of that just allow us to verify that the process is being followed and that it's being done accurately and that it's producing accurate results.
Thanks, Vern. As I noted earlier, the office's recent audit testing efforts and recalls have shown that some licensees are due for reminders around sampling, handling, and the use of remediation technology. Starting with sample collection, Diana, could you talk more about what a representative sample means?
Sure. So a representative sample is exactly what it sounds like. You want to create a sample of your batch of cannabis flower or product that has the same characteristics as the overall batch of cannabis material. So whether that means the contaminants that might be there or just THC potency, you want to know exactly what's in your batch. So in order to do this, the batch should be at a stage where there will be no further processing occurring after the sample is taken. You want to make sure that the sample truly reflects the batch as it will be sent to either retail or to the next recipient, wherever it's going. So you would take your sample after all treatment has been applied to the batch and all ingredients also have been added to the batch, if it's an edible or something like that. Additionally, you would need to make sure that your batch is as homogeneous as possible before sampling. So for concentrates and edibles, they really have to be thoroughly mixed before you take that sample. You want to make sure you get a really good representation of the entire batch. So once the batch is in its final form, it's been well homogenized, and you are ready to take a sample. At that point, you need to have access to the entire batch. You have to have all of your sampling tools clean, sanitized, and at the ready. So as an example for this, let's say you have a batch of processed flour. You have 5 kilograms in your batch. So when you're taking your sample, you need to make sure that you're going to take the correct amount of flour or amount of the batch of whatever kind of matrix you have. So you can use, we have table 5A in the rules for certification of cannabis testing facilities, or in appendix A of in section 11 of the rules for the testing of adult use cannabis. We also have guidance that outlines the entire process to use. So those are all really good references to use before you're ready to take your first sample. So if you have, again, a 5 kilogram batch of flour, the correct amount that you need in your sample is 16 grams. So you want to make sure you get the correct amount, and you also want to take that 16 gram sample in enough increments over the entire batch so you can cover the entire batch. So that would mean taking 16 individual increments that weigh 1 gram each throughout that batch. So when you're taking the sample, you want to get as many different locations as you can. So if you have your flour in 2 different separate bags, then you would take 8 grams out of each bag in 1 gram increments, and then you would take those increments from the top, the bottom, and the middle of each bag. So in that way, you'll get the best representation of the entire batch as possible.
Great, thank you, Diana. A quick next question for you. What are some of the do's and don'ts licensees should keep in mind when collecting representative sample from a batch that's subject to mandatory testing?
Sure. So some of the do's, do make sure your batch is done being processed. Do make sure it is homogeneous as possible, and you have access to the entire batch. Make sure your sampling area, tools, the equipment, everything that you're going to be using are clean and sanitized before you sample. Do be sure to understand and use the sample size tables and the rules before beginning, so that you can avoid the don't of taking the wrong sample size. Nobody likes it when that happens. It just makes a lot of more hassle and expense for the licensee, certainly. So some additional don'ts are, don't treat the sample portion differently than the overall batch, either before or after sampling. This would include treating the sample with things like ozone, heat, hydrogen peroxide, or radiation if the entire batch was not treated the exact same way at the same time.
Thanks, Diana. Vern, what reminders would you like to share about remediation or pretreatment technology?
I think I would like to just recap a little bit on what Diana said about treating the sample itself. You should never sample first and then treat the batch or the sample. Even if you're planning on treating them exactly the same way, do not take the sample first. The sample has to be representative, and in order for that to be representative, it's critical that you do all your treatment at the same time and then collect your sample. The other thing that I would say is that with some of these technologies, some of them are new to us here in Maine, specifically radiation, and certainly some of the hydrogen peroxide vaporization units and things like that are on the market. I would say to make sure that you are following the instructions that come with the product so that you're utilizing it properly and that you're treating the material properly. Something as simple as saying, rather than putting whole flour in, I'm going to grind the flour and then put the ground product in, could result in a different treatment that is not as effective because you've increased the density. That's just one example that comes immediately to mind. It may be that it works perfectly well, but we don't know that, and the licensee may not know that. So these are reasons why it's critically important that you treat the whole batch, you homogenize that batch, and then you sample from it, and that nothing happens to the batch after that sampling happens. You cannot continue to treat it. You need to then wait for the results to come in. That's one of the things that's the most critical. The other thing I'll say is that, errors occur with sampling. We see this a lot with new licensees, but we also see it happening with folks who are sort of veterans, if you will, that have more familiarity. And I think it just becomes commonplace and small errors start to slip in and mistakes are made. And I would just urge folks to be really vigilant about how you're sampling to make sure that you're getting that representative sample that Diana talked about. Some of the things that you might consider doing around that are peer review periodically, or supervisory reviews. If you're a facility that's large enough, you have supervisory staff. One of their functions should be to do what we do at OCP, which is come in and look at the video and review it and interview staff and make sure that they're following the process as they're supposed to. And also some annual retraining. This is a skill set that may require retraining periodically, and it's a great use of your resources, I think, to ensure that that sampling is happening in the proper way. You're on mute, John.
Thank you. Before we switch to questions from the audience, are there other reminders or information either of you would like to expand upon regarding any of the topics that we've covered today?
I would just like to say that, taking a fully representative sample, and Vern already mentioned this, but it really produces the best outcome for the testing results for the licensee. And it also ensures that the labels on the final packaged products are as accurate as possible for the consumer, which is, it's a really important thing for just overall health and safety.
Yeah, and I think that in addition to what we've already discussed, one of the things that I would like to point out is that there has been a rule change recently that does require labeling for product that's been treated or remediated. And that change is in effect now. We issued a recent guidance document on it. But and it's important to note that it's not just if it's remediated after it's had a failed test, it's also if it's treated with certain methods like radiation, ozone, hydrogen peroxide prior to the submission of a test. So just make sure that you're aware of that and you're following those label rules.
Great. We're going to move on to Q&A. Some of them have been submitted as the conversation has been going along. Some of them came in as pre-submitted questions. And one of the pre-submitted questions, Diana, I'd love for you to take. The person asks, what standards are used in testing, and are all labs following the same standards?
Well, yeah, so all of the labs get certified through the program over at the CDC. They certify all the cannabis testing facilities. So there's an overarching collection of standards that they have to meet. They have to have certain SOPs. They have to run certain quality control samples during their run. So they have to have, blanks, matrix spikes, duplicates, things like that. Just really standard items that they have to do to prove that the data is accurate and repeatable. So that said, each testing facility might have a different instrument that they use to do the same test. So there might be variation in, one testing facility buys an instrument from one company, another one buys it from a different company, but overall, they have to have the same types of quality assurance programs in place. So they may differ in their specific SOPs or their specific instrumentation that they use, but overall, they do have to have the same types of controls.
Another question that came in from Jacob asked if can metric be automated more for test matrix selection requirements? And so, Jacob, as you might know, our current inventory tracking contract expires in early 2026. And so there will be an RFP for inventory tracking going out soon. And part of that RFP will include requirements or requests rather around exactly that. Diana, I'm going to jump to you for the next question because I know it's something you've worked on. The question asks, do you train your field investigators on how to take distillate samples? So if you could answer that question and talk a little bit about how you've worked with our compliance investigators, our field inspectors around sampling and handling techniques.
Sure. So we did have a training session. It's been a while back, but we did all get together and go through training or how to sample all the different type of matrices. So part of that was the extract. And in dealing with extracts is, we talked about a couple different kind of extracts, but there are quite a few different types. So we try to get the overall basics of the sampling approach, like we've just talked about here today, which is make sure it's representative and clean tools, the whole thing. So that has all been covered. And then, approach your batch of extract with the tools that you need and the methods that you need to get a good representative sample. So we have had training in that. You know, usually a lot of the times we'll also talk on an individual basis, one-on-one, before somebody knows they're going somewhere to do sampling. They'll just talk to me one-on-one individually to see, make sure they've got it, they understand it, what they need to do, and what kind of tools they need to have with them. So yeah, we do interact on that topic whenever we have the need.
Excellent, thank you. All right, I'm just scrolling through some of the questions. Next one, could you address why testing requirements include filter foreign material, microbials, and water activity for edibles? The person asking the question goes on to say, no other food processor in the state is required to do these tests on their food products. Why are we? The concentrate has already been tested for all of those categories. And why to continue this testing in the face of high testing costs? Diana, could you talk a little bit about the requirements for that type of testing for edibles specifically?
Yeah, well, the first part of that I'd like to just get out there is that, so if you do have a concentrate that is going to go into making an edible, you actually do not need to test it for microbials, or concentrates don't need water activity testing, period, or filth and foreign. Those things don't need to be tested on concentrates if they're going to be used for edibles. Once you use that and you process that extract further into an edible product, at that point, you've done more processing to that and you're making a new product. So at that point, then yes, you do need that testing in your final product that's going to be sold at retail. And I mean, it's filth and foreign material, so you don't want to sell product that has foreign material in it. And we want to make sure that that doesn't happen. Water activity is important for shelf stability. So that is something that needs to be done to make sure that when you have your final product, if it sits on the shelf for a month or two at the retail, that it does not continue to, grow bacteria in it that would be unsafe for the consumer. So that's an important thing to have tested. And the last is, I believe it was the microbial testing. And of course, that's just something that you don't want people eating products that have harmful bacteria in them. And that's just overall food safety. So that's the reason why we have those tests. And that's, the sequence of where the tests are required and where they are not.
Thanks, Diana. We have another question on concentrates. So while we're staying in this same theme, I'd like to follow up on this one. If a concentrate, in this case, the person asking the question is referencing batter, is made and tested and passed for everything, then that concentrate is taken and they decide they wanted the solid concentrate made into oil. We decarb it to make oil out of that same product, no additives, just decarb, heat in the oven, from a batter to an oil. Then we retest and send for testing. Does that product need to be tested for pesticides and heavy metals again, even though it passed the first time?
So if you're not, and I don't know this process thoroughly enough. If you're not adding anything to it, if all you're doing is heating it, is that what I understood?
Yep.
If that is in fact all you're doing to it, then you should not have to retest it for the pesticides or the metals.
Okay. Appreciate that. Vern, I'm going to jump to you because the question is focused on a topic you were talking about earlier. Can remediation techniques be used prior to first compliance sample testing? And what recording process is necessary if so?
Yeah, sure, John. So I think the question is asking, can you treat products like, say, radiate them or treat them with ozone prior to testing? And the answer is yes, you can do that. That could be part of your processing and part of your plan of record. So that's allowed, and it's not prohibited. And what kind of recording has to happen with that? Well, we would want to know that that's being done. So we would ask for some internal records around that, whether it's through your plan of record or however you choose to document it. But there should be documentation about when that's happening and how it's being applied.
Thanks, Vern. And a follow-up here, a similar related question and a topic that you talked a little bit about, but I think it's important to circle back on. The question asks, if I'm using radiation equipment for sterilization of cannabis product, flower and trim, do I have to take the sample afterwards, or can the sample be in the radiation equipment with the batch? I'm asking, can I take the sample prior to running the radiation equipment, but sterilize it with the bulk product?
So that's a great question, and I'm glad it was asked specifically. And the answer is that you should not sample first. You should treat the entire batch and then take the representative sample after the entire batch has been treated. Even if they're going in the unit at the same time, there could be issues around density. There could be issues around the placement of the product within the unit itself, and maybe it's getting a heavier dose or a lighter dose of radiation. Because of all these variables, what we found is that the best practice, and the one that we're requiring, is that you actually treat the entire batch and then take the representative sample. That's always going to be the best practice.
And Diana, I thought that was a great answer from Vern, but I just wanted to give you an opportunity if you had anything to add to that.
No, Vern summarized it very well.
Great. So there's a comment here that is a bit misinformed, and so I think it's important for us to address this comment so misinformation doesn't get out into the space. Vern and/or Diana, whoever wants to take it. The claim is you can lab shop due to the policy you have, and that's why we are seeing recalls.
Well, I mean, just to kind of level set, I think I don't think that policy allows you to lab shop. What our policy says is that if you send a product for mandatory testing to Lab A, then Lab A is the lab that will be utilized for all the testing of that product from that point moving forward. So we do not allow you to lab shop. So you can't get a failed result from Lab A and then resubmit it to Lab B in hopes of getting the best result for you. So I would just disagree that we allow lab shopping. We do allow licensees to select whatever lab they want to for that initial testing. But once you've selected that lab, that's the lab that is required to complete all the testing of that product. And that's something that we try to utilize at OCP when we're doing audit samples and when we're doing investigatory samples. We try to always utilize the same lab as well. There may be times that we have to utilize a different lab, but in most cases, we utilize the same lab, and we do not allow lab shopping. But we also want to allow businesses to feel free to spread their business across the state to other testing facilities, so that if they want to see which is more convenient for them or which has a better customer interface for them, that's fine. But that's not lab shopping.
Thanks. Diana, anything to add to that?
No, not necessarily. I would say that there are quite a few licensees that do go and try all of the different labs that are available, and they're free to do so. We don't prohibit that. And like Vern said, some have different levels of customer service, some have different interfaces that work better, for some people and some not. So it's, freedom of choice.
I really appreciate the engagement we're having with all the questions that are coming in, and I also appreciate people's patience as I'm trying to go through all of them. Oh, and one just jumped off of my page that I was going to ask. Oh, here we go. Diana, if anything is added to a concentrate oil or distillate, say flavorings or cannabis-derived terpenes, does it then need to be retested?
Yeah, so, and I believe I mentioned this a little bit earlier. You should send your batch for testing when it is in its final form. So if you're gonna add different flavorings or terpenes or whatever you're adding to it. You wait until you're done doing that, and then you send it in for your final testing. That said, you can, if you have like a large batch of extract, you can do your pesticide and metals testing on it first, divide that up into however many sub batches you want to make out of that. You want to make 5 different terpene flavors out of that. You can do that, and those pesticides and metals analysis count for all of those 5 batches. But once you're done adding other ingredients, separate different ingredients to all the other sub batches, those all need to be tested separately.
Great. A question came in from Sean for Vern or Diana, either of you to take. If all of the labs are held to the same standards, why would it matter if you lab shopped? Isn't it standard across the board?
I think that that's one of those questions that it's a good question. The idea behind it is that it's not necessarily the technology that labs utilize. It's the concern that labs may, they're businesses. And in other states, we've seen where labs have been accused of tainting results and putting forward results that are what the licensee wants, not necessarily what the instruments are producing. And that's the biggest issue around lab shopping. It's not that the equipment is inferior at one versus the other, or that the staff is somehow not trained properly or not well suited to this. It's that the lab is inclined to offer the results that you want in order to guarantee that they're going to get your business. And that's really what lab shopping is to me. It's not really a test around the technology or the skill set. It's around the idea of malfeasance at the lab level. And that is something that we take very seriously. It is a point that Diana is constantly tracking on. She regularly reports out to senior staff results of her analysis of, by use of histograms and other statistical models to monitor labs to make sure that we're not seeing lab shopping and that we're not seeing labs that are producing inconsistent results for certain licensees. That's the bigger issue around lab shopping in my mind. I don't know if Diana has other thoughts on that.
No, I think that's exactly right, Vern. I agree with that. We're trying to take away the incentive for a lab to produce lab results that are not accurate to that sample.
And Vern, as you noted, this is a topic that comes up among the states. We just participated in a biannual Cannabis Regulators Association meeting, and this is a topic that comes up. And being able to learn and really listen to the experiences of other states, particularly states that have had challenges in this space, understanding what the weaknesses in those policies were that allowed or facilitated that type of inconsistency, and making sure that we do not have those same challenges is critically important. And so those types of meetings do allow us to understand situations, even if those situations have not yet come up in our state, to make sure that we're able to prevent it. And as Diana said, and Vern said, by being able to monitor data, we're able to identify inconsistencies that may arise in any way, and being able to address those accordingly is important. The next question that's come up, it's a little bit longer of a question, so be patient with me. Is there a health concern that might have flagged these concerns? And I think based on the whole question, the person is talking a bit about recalls. It seems like we're over-regulating solventless processes. We should be encouraging it. Seems like we're worried about the wrong things. A lot of these concerns are beginner-level questions. I would ask, how is it stored? And I assume that means the product generally. Where is it grown and for how long? No one is using remediation unless they don't know how to grow. Let's not get so deep into things that are not health concerns. Let's dial in quality. Vern, I'll kick it to you, but first, I just want to note a big part of why we're having this cannabis conversation today is because of challenges that we're experiencing in the field. And so for the person who asked this question, layered into that, I think are a lot of central questions that exist, as well as I think your own perspective about how growers should operate and how they should be behaving. But given the system that we have, the statutes that we abide by, and the rules that we have, we are finding these challenges have popped up. And so rather than sticking our head in the sand and just hoping that they go away, we're using this opportunity as a way to work with licensees, communicate to licensees, and to hopefully improve those types of processes, as Diana was talking, particularly around sampling and handling. And we're hoping, we can have positive benefits coming out of this moving forward. Part of some of the recalls, as well as part of what Vern talked about before, where Diana is monitoring data and we are able to put administrative holds on products before they make it to retail, is to try to have a system that works as best as possible. And we are in a position where people are making mistakes. Not all of the recalls and other types of holds that we have to put on this is because someone is trying to trick the system. In many cases, it's an operator who's changed a process and didn't think through that process, or just made simple errors, not in a malicious way, but because accidents happen and people are human. And so this is an ability to make sure that people who might be making mistakes can understand what's going on and recognize those mistakes and make corrections before it becomes a bigger problem, and to communicate to people to make sure that if they are going to change a process in the future, that they really understand each step by step to ensure that whatever that change is still going to allow the system to be rigorous and consistent and work in the way that it is supposed to. But Vern, I wanted to kick it to you in case you had anything to add.
Well, I think the other thing that we should say too, John, is that, as an office, as a regulator, we walk a line between needing to ensure public health and safety, but also doing that in a responsible way that doesn't handcuff the industry and doesn't prevent the industry from being as nimble as it needs to be in order to remain competitive. Cannabis is still evolving, and methods are still evolving around production, and whether or not something is irradiated, whether it's grown indoor or outdoor, whether it's processed using solventless methods or whether it's using solvents. All of those are things that we want to be able to regulate and respond to quickly, so that we're not a hindrance to the industry, but we're also fulfilling our need and our mandate to ensure public health and safety are our top priority.
Diana, I just wanted to give you an opportunity to see if you had anything to add.
No, I don't. I think Vern summed it up exactly. It's really looking out for the health and safety of the consumers is an important responsibility that we have.
Great. Thank you both. So we have time for a few more questions. Sorry, the screen of questions I'm looking at keeps moving when more questions come in. Diana, I think this is for you. It's going to be about potency. Can OCP implement standardization for THC testing like other states such as Massachusetts or Maine's own hemp industry? Moisture content skews THC potency. As I understand, with Massachusetts and Maine, hemp samples are tested, assumed to be at 0 moisture content.
Well, I would say that, well, first of all, we don't oversee hemp, so I'm not sure what is going on with the hemp industry. But for the cannabis, we have the samples delivered as, dried cannabis. So you have to meet the water activity standards. So the grower, the licensee who submits the sample, dries it to the level that they they think is correct for them. And as long as it passes water activity testing, that is fine. I mean, it is true, the more you dry it, the higher potency that you'll get out of that, but we don't mandate a specific dryness or percent moisture beyond passing the test. So that's, again, it's up to the licensee to determine what works best for them.
Thanks, Diana. Vern, anything to add there?
No, I think Diana covered that well. Thank you.
Great. Okay, next question. Pre-rolls are made from tested flower and then made into pre-rolls, which is the final form. Is testing of the final pre-roll required?
Yeah, sure. You know, and depending on, you know, there's pre-rolls, there's infused pre-rolls. Pre-rolls that have not been infused, you can, if you've tested the flower already for the pesticides and the metals, your pre-rolls don't have to be tested for metals and pesticides. But once you are finished processing that pre-roll into a pre-roll, then you do have to test it for the other required tests: the potency, the microbials, the yeast and mold, the filth and foreign. That all does have to be done because you have done more processing since it was just in its flower state. So that is why we have to do the additional testing at the end of that. And for infused pre-rolls, that goes the same thing. Whatever you're adding to that pre-roll is, if the concentrate has already been tested for pesticides and metals and residual solvents, you do not have to test the final infused pre-roll for those items. You just have to do the potency, the microbials, the filth and foreign for that.
And just to follow up on that, Diana, our statutes require, the statutes that the legislature passes requires that testing needs to be done when manufacturing could introduce any new contaminants, and thus the answer that that Diana gave. The next question, and this is for you, Vern, from Jameson. Are you still audit sampling in cultivation facilities? If not, what was the reason for stopping after only audit sampling very few licensees?
Sure. So we did start audit sampling that resulted in a few recalls. One of the things that we like to do here at OCP is that when we identify a problem, we want to communicate that out to the industry right away so that the industry can take action to correct these things. And what the problem was that we identified, we've been talking about in this webinar around sampling and properly sampling and treating samples differently. That resulted in some recalls. And now that we've identified that issue, we're prepared to resume audit sampling as part of cultivation inspections. We did pause it for a short period of time so that we could get word out to the industry about the need to make this correction and to make this change. And we've been doing that. We've done it through a recent guidance document, and we're certainly getting the word out through this meeting right now. And so we do anticipate that we'll be beginning audit sampling once again. And I would just point out that we have continued to do investigative sampling whenever that comes up.
Diana, this question I think would be for you. And we're running short on time, but does every sample cup, 3 sample cups are used per sample, provided from the licensee to the testing facility, need a tamper label from the testing facility on it, as well as a contains THC label? Or is it sufficient just using one tamper label and one contains THC label on the box containing the sample cups that is then handed off to the testing facility?
Okay.
And I can repeat that again if you need.
I think I got it. Each individual sample needs to have the tamper-resistant seal on it. And it has to have the, for testing purposes only, sticker on it. So that needs to be on each individual sample itself. and I'm not sure about the contains THC sample is, I'm not sure that that is also on samples or if that's just on products.
Okay, thanks. Vern, anything to follow up on there?
No, I think Diana covered that. Thank you.
All right. Well, we're closing in on the end of time. We're past 11:59. I wanted to thank both of our panelists, Diana and Vern, for participating today. And thanks to all of you for taking time out of your morning to listen in. For Vern and Diana, my last question for both of you, if people do have additional questions based on today's seminar, who is the best person to reach out to with questions?
I'm always happy to answer questions that I receive either through email or by phone call.
Yeah, I think that Diana is a great resource. I know that the OCP compliance inspectors utilize her very often when they have technical questions, and she's the person that I think is well suited in our office to answer those. But I'm also available too if folks would like to email me.
Excellent. Thank you both, and thank you all for attending today. Stay tuned for future communications from OCP about future cannabis conversations in the new year. Take care.
Thank you, John.